Well, good morning again. My name's Bryan, for those of you who don't know me, and this is my wife, Carmenza, and we're pleased to be doing Sunday service with you today. I'm going to start with our reading from Rays of the One Light. This is weekly commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriya-yoga. This is week 46. It's called The Promise of the Scriptures. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. In the Gospel of St. Luke, chapter 15, we read the famous parable of the prodigal son. Jesus tells of the man who took the wealth bestowed on him by his father and squandered it in foreign lands where he fell into evil ways. At last, repentant, he returned to his father's home. When his father saw him, he was, as Jesus tells us, moved with compassion and ran and fell upon his neck and kissed him. And the son said, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and before thee. I am no longer worthy to be called thy son." But the father said to his servants, "Fetch quickly the best robe and put it on him, and give him a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet. And bring out the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and make merry. Because this my son was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and is found." And they began to make merry. Small-hearted human beings, identified as they are with their little egos, give exaggerated importance to any slight they receive from others. Thus, they imagine God, like them, to be petty, unpardoning, and vindictive. In God's eyes, however, when human beings go astray, there is nothing to forgive. All of us are aspects only of His own self. He who made us resides in us. He is not far away from us in some far-off heaven. His call to us always is to return to our own home within. The way of return is described in the Bhagavad Gita in the 6th chapter. Supreme blessedness is that yogi who has completely calmed his mind, controlled his ego-active tendencies, and purged himself of desire, thereby attaining oneness with Brahma, the infinite spirit. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om. What a lovely juxtaposition from these two scriptures. I love that it's titled The Promise of the Scriptures, plural, because on the one hand you have the Western Judeo-Christian teaching from Jesus of the prodigal son, which is basically about how we can expect to be received anytime that we turn towards God. And then the Eastern teachings from the Gita are about how we actually turn towards God. And I want to emphasize the Christian teaching a little bit more, talking this morning. I always thought that a prodigal son was a good thing, because I wasn't raised Christian and I'd heard this term prodigal son, the prodigal son returns. I thought it meant that's a really good thing because it sounded so much like prodigy. So I thought it was like the prodigy son is returned. I thought this was a good thing, and turns out the Latin roots for those two words are very different. And so this parable has so many deep teachings. Not only is it completely uplifting, but there was a reason that Jesus told this parable to his disciples. And one of the core advantages of this teaching being emphasized, and it is a beloved teaching, is that it goes directly in contradiction to the falsehood of original sin. That some aspects of Christianity say that we were born in original sin. And that is not consistent with this parable that Jesus tells us, because if we were born in these bodies in original sin, how would we be welcomed back by God? Why would we be welcomed back by God? And so it's only in the sense that we understand this parable to be about not our physical birth incarnation, but our soul birth, because at some point in time, we emerged from God. Our souls emerged from God. And so this isn't a parable about how to be a good father or how to behave or anything. This is a very high teaching about how we will be received by God every time and any time that we choose to turn towards God. Now, there's a part of the parable that's a little bit longer from the Bible reading than this excerpt that I just read. The prodigal son goes out and takes his inheritance and spends all of his money in a foreign land. And at some point, a famine comes across that land, that everybody is hungry And so he's forced to take on work with a local farmer to feed the pigs. And he's feeding these pigs this slop, and he's hungering for that food because he isn't getting fed hardly at all. And that's the point where he decides, I could do this work in my father's house. I could be one of the servants, working on the farm, and they're well fed. And that's at the point where the prodigal son says, I'm going to head home. And Master says an interesting thing here about that the hunger and the famine that person felt is the unhappiness that we feel when we try to go out into the world and we don't get any sustenance from it. We don't get any nutrition from, so to speak, from the world back, from being in the worldly areas. He says the unhappiness man feels when he finds himself bereft of inner nourishment. So again, this is talking about inner nourishment, which is starting to direct us back towards how we get back to God. And to put it in terms of Dwapara Yuga thinking, in terms of we're in an age of energy, he has the experience of putting out energy and not really getting anything back. He's putting out energy to enjoy the good things of the earthly world, but he's not getting any nourishment. He's not getting anything back, essentially. And this is the point where he decides, I'm going to return to my Father. And then the Father's greeting is what God will always do for us, as it says in the reading. From God's perspective, there's nothing to forgive that any of us do, because God knows us. He knows us as we are. He knows our soul quality. And this isn't anything that is either surprising that we get distracted. In a way, Master and Kriya-yoga both say that we're all prodigal sons. Anytime our attention is outward in the world. And so I was thinking about well-known or historical figures who were prodigal sons. And I thought of King David, but I also thought of John Newton. And many of you may know that John Newton was the person who wrote the hymn Amazing Grace. And that's become over almost 250 years later, a very well-known hymn in Christianity in the West. And Newton was very much a prodigal son. He was a bad boy. He was raised very Christian by his mom until the age of 6 or 7, and she died, and his father worked on a ship, and so he went into working as a sailor. But he was he was sort of the worst of the worst. Even among sailors, he was considered to have a very foul mouth. He was known for using a lot of profanity, and he was always rebelling and criticizing the first mate or the captain of the ship. He was in the Royal Navy, and he got flogged because he deserted, or for desertion. I don't know if he actually did, but he was in for a while he worked on a slave trading ship running people from Africa to the Americas, and they couldn't stand him so much that they put him ashore in Africa, in a port in Africa. And he was actually enslaved for over a year with the black slaves that were being held there before transport. And so he had a really rough go with the world. And his father arranged for him to be picked up from this port in Africa and by another slave trader. And so they got on the ship called the Greyhound, and in 1748 he's sailing back to England, and there's a tremendous storm, and the ship is almost capsizing. It's filling with water, And for about 70 hours, he is one of the few people on the ship that's able to steer it, and finally they arrive in port in Ireland. And during that crisis, he thought he was going to die, and he asked for the mercy of God. He said, basically, God have mercy on us. He remembered this from his childhood, from his mother's teachings. And so the first thing he does when he gets into port in Ireland is he goes to a church and he, basically thanks God, and he decides he wants to become a minister. And he's not allowed to become a minister because he doesn't have any education beyond age 10, and he usually had to have a university degree. This is in the 1750s. And so his only work that he's familiar with is being on a ship and being a sailor, and he goes back to that work. So he spends about 5 or 6 years as a first mate on slave ships that were running people to the Americas for enslavement. And he has this firsthand experience of what the horrors of the slave trade are. And this is where he, at some point, about 5 or 6 years into doing that work, he has a seizure, and for health reasons, his doctor says, you need to quit sailing. And so that's, God kind of giving him the push, and so he stops doing that, and again, he wants to become a minister, but they still don't let him, and so he writes a book about his adventures and his stories, and he's starting to write a little bit about the slave trade, and one of the members of Parliament, people in the political movement, the abolitionist movement, picked up this book and was able to help him become a minister. So he becomes an Anglican minister, and I don't know, several years later, maybe 15 years later, he has a ministry, and he's very well known. He's a very popular minister because he always talks about all the stuff that he did wrong. He talks about himself as a sinner, and all the sins that he did, and all the redemptive power of God. And for a New Year's Day prayer meeting, he writes the words to Amazing Grace. He wrote a lot of hymns, him and his other minister that was in Olney in England. And he writes those words, and we don't know what the music was like because they didn't write down the music, but it was sung as a hymnal. And through the years, it's been evolved and kind of given the musical form that's most familiar to us today. But one of the things about his life story is that he didn't right away, when God saves him from being drowned in the ship, he doesn't right away turn to his later life work, which was really supporting the abolitionist movement, and he was very instrumental in testifying to Parliament about the actual horrors of the slave trade, because he was one of the few people that would come forward and talk about what was really going on. And in the same year that he died, about 6 months before he died, the British government outlawed the slave trade. They abolished the slave trade. They didn't abolish slavery for another generation or so. But this was a very key accomplishment in the consciousness of his country. And he said, at one point, nobody, I would have left this, let me just quote what he said. He said, I think I should have quitted the slave trade sooner had I considered it as I now do to be unlawful and wrong. But I never had a scruple upon this head of mine, nor was such a thought ever suggested to me by any friend. You talk about the slave trade was actually considered in the 1750s, 1760s, actually considered a respectable business, and talk about, environment being stronger than willpower. So I think one of the things about his powerful message, not just in this hymn, but all of his writings and his life is that there isn't necessarily one time when we turn to God, like in the like the prodigal son. At one point he turns and he's accepted back with open arms from his father. It's a something that we need to repeat. In some ways, we need to repeat it kind of every day in our lives. It's getting colder out in the mornings, and it's a little bit harder for me to want to throw off these nice warm blankets and get up for meditation. But really, that's the same instant where we're deciding to turn towards God, to do those activities that bring us to God. And, Master says, one of the main tools, one of the main ways we do this is through meditation, or as the Gita reading said, meditation, calming down our ego activity, and all of the yogic practices that we practice. The Master said of this parable, he said, this is the prodigal son running away from the bliss of meditation into the slums of material distractions. This is a beautiful way to put it, as he often does. And I think the other point, one of the other points to realize about the story of the prodigal son is that one, we can choose any time, another that we have to be chosen, and then there's again that promise that we will be treated as well as anybody, that there's no difference inherently between the soul of an ordinary individual like us and the soul of a master. Think of the greatest masters. And Yogananda talked about a spiritual son as opposed to a prodigal son. He has some really nice writings about it. So the promise of these two scriptures together is so powerful. I think that the yogic techniques that we do, the meditation, the learning of the teachings, learning to have right attitude, all of the things that we learn to do on this path will go much easier as we know the reception, know in our hearts what reception we will get every time we turn towards God. And that's complete, again, there's nothing to forgive, complete love of our hearts, that we use what Master called the throbbing love of our hearts. Consistently, God will only and every time open us because his heart is so big, and that's the image that our heart's been made of. God bless.
Good morning again. For me, it's so hopeful and thrilling, the sweetness of God that he has made promises. Like, all growing up, I was trying to figure out I could feel God's presence, but how does this work? It's sort of like, how do you get there? It's sort of like, and then when I came into this path, Master explaining that there's promises that, that there's all these masters that come for us and the teachings, and they write it down. So because it's so easy to forget, because we get so distracted, and then we forget that God is there, that he's there whenever we turn to him. And then they write it down, the scriptures, and they said that, and so in this reading it says the promise of the scriptures is like the masters come, they write it for us. They don't just tell us and then they leave, because then we will forget. I know that he sends something back over, they forgot already, but there's the scriptures. And I read the Boatman's promise, because Master talks in that poem that he will come back again and again and again and again until everyone, if there's one left behind, he will come back 1 trillion times for us. That to me is the sweetest thing, that the gift that God has given us, And then, Swami writes that when we commit errors, we just forget. We forget that God is there. We think that he will never forgive us. God doesn't love us anymore. How could this happen to me? And, how could I have done this? And I can never ask him, because he just, we forget that it's us that forget him, that he's always there. And Master talks about, Judas, one of the disciples of Jesus that betrayed him. And he had the tendency for money and fame, and he thought that he was getting Jesus to go ahead and be a king, but he for gold he told the Pharisees where he was going to be, and they took Jesus and they killed him. And Master talks about the error in Judas. I mean, yeah, he made a big error, but the worst of it all was that he didn't go into seclusion for his rest of his life and connected with God, because he had already had that in him. He was a great soul, a high soul. He was one of Jesus' disciples. But he thought that God would never want him anymore because of his mistake, and he killed himself. And still, another promise that is in the scriptures is that all of our spiritual progress will never go away. Through our incarnations, any spiritual progress that we have made, it will remain there. All we got to do is turn to God, and it's all there. So Master says that he met Judas in his lifetime in the early 1900s. He was a disciple of Ramakrishna Paramhansa, and he was a Swami in the order, and that one of the Swamis there told Master that Jesus had appeared to Ramakrishna and told him that to give him liberation, that he had already, he was a great soul, and he had taken 2,000 years, almost 2,000 years, for him to turn towards God, and he became a monk. That Master says that there's a line, and there's God, and there's Satan, and that they're both extending their hands out to reach for you, and that anytime you just have to decide which way to go, and that it will go, if you go towards God, that God will just grab and take you. If you turn towards the Satan, that energy will pull you. And it will pull you enough that it will tell you that God doesn't want you. Because that's what we think, when we're when we're struggling, then we just keep stronger into that struggle, and we think that, oh, God doesn't want us right now. We just got to figure it out on our own. And that's how the devil grabs you, you want to keep going in that way. The other promise that is very dear to me from the scriptures is that Jesus says, whenever two or more are together in my name, I will be there. And this is the energy that people feel when they go on pilgrimage. Because Master said that whenever the presence of God descends to earth, towards people, that energy remains there forever. And that when we pray, we gather together and we pray and we feel the presence of God, that energy remains there. And so that's why we feel it in temples. We feel it in, when we meditate together in our chapel, when we meditate together 2 or 3 more, and we pray for God, that God's energy is there. There's a story, one of my brothers was very dedicated, and it was his to St. Francis. He had a very strong connection to St. Francis from very young, and he was always involved in the church and youth groups. And he named his son Francesco. And when he graduated from, I think, high school, he took him to Assisi. And they also went to Medjugorje, to the Lady of Medjugorje. And if you guys don't know, there's been apparitions of the Divine Mother of the Virgin Mary in Medjugorje since 1981. And she talks about to pray, form groups, form communities, and pray together. And she's been appearing ever since. And so he got to go there, and he got inspired to form a community, because that's one of the things that she teaches is form communities in God, And so he was inspired to do that, and he was in the process of doing that, and then COVID hits, and then he got very ill, and he was in the hospital dying. And when a bunch of us are, there's 8 of us, and so we all went to visit him we couldn't really visit him because he was on the glass. We could see him through, the rooms where he was there, but we couldn't go see him, but we could see him through a glass window. And during that time, he had a group that he was getting together to do this community that had a statue of the Lady of Medjugorje. Is about 6 feet tall, and she always appears with clouds under her feet and then a crown, and so the statue is like that. And they all signed their names to have this statue in their homes, like a week at a time. And so then his wife signed to this statue to come to their house. When that statue came into the house, it was this amazing energy. It was like just the presence of God had come in, and it filled the whole house with her presence. And other people gave up their time, so then the statue could stay there. I think it was there for 2 or 3 weeks. And it was this so sweet, this energy just talks about that same promise that, imagine that the statue gets passed on, and every night they just pray, and they fill their house with their presence, with the presence of God. And it was so palpable, this statue. My brother did pass away, and I think it's hard for people to understand that, everybody thought that because he was so dedicated to God that he shouldn't die. But, all of us are going to die. But I think it was the presence of the divine that everybody felt that has helped his family just be successful. Now they just filled with God and doing so much work in the world, and they go singing about God. That's what, they're the 3 children, they're musicians, and they go to concerts and sing about God. It's like there's all these promises that is so thrilling to us because we can rely on them. We can rely that no matter what happens to us, and distractions are going to happen because God created those distractions. And so he's not going to get upset that we get distracted. It's just that we just got to keep turning to Him when we get lost. Sometimes I get lost in feeling like somebody's done me wrong, and I sometimes you just get so lost, and in the middle of it, all I have to do is like, there is God. And then as soon as I turn that, the thought towards God, automatically I feel better and I can think better, because sometimes when you get upset, it's hard to think about, hard to think outside of it. But just that turn in your mind, just a little turn, you cross that line, you turn, and then I could feel, what am I upset about? It's sort of like it just gives you enough energy to be able to think through the difficulty, and then it's gone. That's what Master says. When you're in a difficult situation, lift the energy towards the spiritual eye, and it will just be like, just like that, it can switch your energy towards God. May we all just keep practicing our teachings and remember always.
Love is all I know, sun rays on the snow of a winter long, in darkness without song. Oh, my heart's a fire, burning all desire. Only you remain, and life again. Too long I did stray, flung lifetimes away, imagined you did not care. I know now your smile was mine all the while. I listened and love was there. I can't breathe for love, all the stars above call to me, come home. Life's waves all end in foam. Only love can heal all the pain I feel. What a fool was I to turn away. Too long I did stray, flung lifetimes away, imagined you did not care. I know now your smile was mine all the while. I listened and love was there. I can't breathe for love, all the stars above call to me, come home. Life's waves all end in foam.